Beautiful, beautiful. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. So hopefully everyone's doing okay. We're getting to the end of the semester where things are getting a little bit hectic and things are getting a little bit busy. So finals week is coming up in a few weeks. So try your best not to try to cram. Try to avoid cramming if at all possible. So if you can, see if you can start reviewing from some of the older stuff as much as possible. That'll kind of help you. That way you have a smoother time with the final down the road. But just as a reminder, make sure that you get today's classwork done. Make sure you get the homework done before Thursday as well. And then exam 3 will be on Canvas this upcoming Thursday. So Jared's question is, will there be a study guide for the final as well? There will be a study guide. So I will post that after exam 3. So you'll know exactly what you need to do to study for it. And then I'll give more details on that next week after the exam too. Okay. All right, any questions on what's coming up in the next couple weeks here? Okay, cool. All righty then. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at our next kind of block here. And so our next unit is going to be looking at kind of evolution and how we are able to look at whether certain species are going to be related to one another and how they can be related to one another. So this is what we'll be talking about next week when we get to chapter 11. But before we get into that, when we think of evolution, what do we normally think of? What comes to mind when you think of evolution? What do we think of? Okay, so Kimberly says she thinks of Darwin and then fish and monkeys. Okay, I'll go ahead and write that up. Anybody else? What else do we think of? Sorry, Darwin, fish, monkeys, or fish and monkeys. We see Jared said genetic change based on the environment or mutations. Okay. Hasmin said going from cavemen to men or to man. Okay. What else do we think of? So adaptations. Cool. Good, absolutely. Okay. Anything else? Let's see if we can get one more. Let's see. Okay. Oh, that's okay. We got a pretty good list here. So, and Kimberly said getting better. So let me go ahead and write that one up here as well. So getting better is another one. So we see a lot of different types of things that we think about when we think about evolution. Okay. And so when we think about evolution, there's going to be certain things that we're going to know are going to be true here. And so when we think about evolution, there's kind of a mainstream definition of evolution, and then there's kind of the more accurate, biology definition of evolution here. Looks like my keyboard's kind of frozen here. Let me see if I can stop share. Oh. Yeah, it looks like my computer's stuck, but we'll figure this out in a second. So basically, there's two kind of main ideas when it comes to evolution. The first one is, people think of, evolution, monkeys evolving into humans, and you have different species that eventually become another species, become something different. Okay, that is not entirely true, and in fact, the idea that monkeys eventually evolved into people, okay, is not actually accurate, and that's actually been debunked, for quite some time now. And so the more accurate definition of evolution is a change in the population over time. Okay. Yeah, looks like my computer is stuck. Is everyone able to still hear me? Is everyone okay here? Yeah, okay. All righty, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my computer because it's got me stuck. But I'll just kind of go off of this from memory. So when we think about evolution, so evolution we normally think of as a change in a population over time. So that can be a change in size, it can be a change in genetics, it can be a change in any number of things. But as long as the population is changing over a period of time, okay, that's going to tell us that evolution is occurring. Okay. Now the key there is that individuals do not evolve, right? So if we're thinking about, a rabbit evolving from, from a certain, or thinking of a rabbit growing, okay, over the period of its lifespan, okay, that's not evolution. Okay, that's just growth. Okay, that's just, a process that happens throughout life. Okay, so individuals themselves are not going to evolve. I'm not going to evolve over the course of my life. You're not going to evolve over the course of your life. Your dog's not going to evolve over the course of their life. Okay, individuals do not evolve. Okay, however, populations do evolve over time. Okay, so we have a population of rabbits, they might evolve over a period of time. If you have a population of humans, they might evolve over a period of time. If we have a population of trees, okay, like acorn trees or oak trees, okay, they might evolve over a period of time. Okay, but the individual trees themselves are not going to evolve over their lifespan. They're just going to grow and go through their normal day-to-day kind of functions and processes. Okay, so that's going to be what we're going to be seeing here. Now the key for evolution is a process called natural selection. Okay, so natural selection is a process, and I'll talk about what that is in a second, but it's a process that's going to depend on variation between individuals. Okay, so from person to person or animal to animal or organism to organism, okay, there's going to be certain differences, right? Some squirrels might be faster than other squirrels. Some squirrels might be darker than other squirrels. But there's going to be a variation in their traits. Okay? Now, the specific traits that they have is going to determine and how well they're able to survive in that environment. Okay? And that's going to lead us into natural selection. Okay? So natural selection, as you probably remember from like high school biology or something like that, is usually defined as survival of the fittest, okay? Which is a pretty good example, or a pretty good kind of definition in that it tells you that only the best are going to survive. Okay? But it's kind of an incomplete definition. Okay? So natural selection is essentially the ability of an organism to survive in that particular environment and be able to reproduce based on the traits that it has, okay? And how well those traits allow it to survive and reproduce. Okay? So natural selection, okay, happens within individuals. Okay? So for example, if we have a giraffe with a short neck versus a giraffe with a long neck, okay, the giraffes with long necks are going to be better able to get food that's higher up in the trees than giraffes with short necks. Okay? And so as a result, the short neck giraffes are going to be the ones that die off. Okay? So natural selection works on individuals, evolution will work on populations. Okay? So in order for us to have evolution take place, we need natural selection to occur in individuals. Yeah, it looks like we are really stuck here. I'm trying to think. Let's see. I'm going to try to give an example, but I'm going to need to kind of figure out what's going on with my computer first. So I'm on the Windows, but I think my computer is just kind of, or my Zoom is just stuck. I'm not entirely sure why or what's going on. Okay. Control F. Okay. Let me try. Yeah, that's not doing it either. Yeah, it looks like we're just stuck all the way around. Okay, I may have to log out of here real quick. So give me like 5 minutes to kind of force restart my computer, and then I'll try this again. So hang tight. I'll be back. I'll be back here. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I left you, but I'm back. I'm back. Okay, so let's try this again here. Any second now. There we go. Okay. So there's our PowerPoint. Okay, coolio. Coolio. Here we go. And there we go. Okay. So everyone able to see the PowerPoint again? Yes. All right, cool. Okay. All right, so everything is working out. All right, so this is just basically everything I just mentioned. So again, just to kind of recap here, evolution happens in a population. Okay, so evolution is just going to be a change in a population over time. And again, individuals do not evolve over their lifespan. Okay, only populations. Okay. Now, the result of evolution is going to, or sorry, the thing that kind of leads to evolution is going to be a change in the genetic makeup of that population. Okay? So, for example, you might have a certain number of alleles or certain number of a particular gene available in that particular population. Okay? But as the environment changes, okay, that's going to cause some of the genetic makeup to change. Okay? I'll give an example of that in a second. Okay? So, environmental changes are going to lead to genetic changes inside the population, and that genetic change is going to lead to evolution. I'll give an example of that. Okay. The key here is for variations in traits. So as long as the traits are changing over a period of time, as long as there's variation in traits from individual to individual, okay, we're going to be able to see natural selection. And that natural selection is going to be based off of just having certain traits that are better able to help you survive in a particular environment, okay? Help you be able to survive and reproduce. So that's going to be what we consider natural selection. Okay? Natural selection works on individuals. Evolution happens over a population. Okay. Let me actually add in a new slide here. So, oops. Let me put in a blank slide. Okay. So I'm gonna give a couple of examples, or give a pretty good example here. So let's say we're starting off with some rabbits. Okay, we'll say we have a black rabbit. Oops, let me move this out the way. Okay. Let's say we've got a population of black rabbits. And here's its legs. Okay. So this is a black rabbit. Whoa, jeez. This is a black rabbit here. Okay. Black rabbit. Okay. Okay. Black rabbit. And then let's say in this other population, okay, or also in this population, we have a population of white rabbits. Okay. Okay. So here's our rabbits. So in this population of rabbits, we'll call this this species of rabbit Rabitus gilroyus. Okay. Just a made up species of rabbits here. Let's say we have black rabbits and we have white rabbits in our population. Okay. So over time, the black rabbits mate with other black rabbits and they produce other, black rabbit babies. Let me do this here. Okay. Okay. So we have other black rabbit babies. Okay. The white rabbits mate with other white rabbits and they produce white rabbit babies. Sorry, my drawing is terrible. Okay. And then the black rabbits eventually meet up with the white rabbits. The black rabbits say, hey, white rabbits, you're kind of cute. White rabbits say, hey, black rabbits, you're kind of cute. Let's make some babies. And now we end up with some gray rabbits. Okay. And then, I don't know what, I think this is. Yeah, we'll just assume this is gray. I'll just put this for gray. So here we have black rabbits. Here we have some white rabbits. And now we also have some gray rabbits here. Okay. So that being said, thank you for appreciating my masterpieces. Oh, sorry, I forgot the tails. Let's go ahead and put the tails in. There we go. Tail, 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 another tail, and then some other tails here. Okay. Okay. So we started off with having black rabbits and white rabbits, and now in another generation here, we have black rabbits, gray rabbits, and white rabbits. Okay. So that being said, has evolution occurred here? So Kimberly says no, Hasmeen says no. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? So the answer here is yes. So evolution has taken place, right? Again, for all you need for evolution is for a change in that population. Okay? Initially, we just had black rabbits and we had white rabbits, okay, for some period of time. Okay? Then over the course of several generations, now we have a population of black rabbits, gray rabbits, and white rabbits. Okay? So now our population has changed. We no longer have just black rabbits and white rabbits. Now we have black, white, and gray rabbits. Okay? So our population has changed, so evolution has taken place. Okay? So this is all that's necessary for evolution. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Yeah, okay. All right, so now let's take another scenario here. And let's say we kind of fast forward to the year 2050, and the average temperature is, we'll say 110 degrees. Okay. That's the average temperature. Okay. The average temperature is 110 degrees from one day to the next. Okay. So if the average temperature increases from 85 degrees to 110 degrees, which of these rabbits do we think is going to end up dying off? The black ones, the gray ones, or the white ones? Right, we're going to say the black ones are going to end up dying off, right? So it's gotten too hot. Okay, dark colors tend to absorb heat, and so for the sake of this example, we'll just say the red rabbits begin dying off here. Okay. So let me do this in red. We no longer have our red rabbits in our 2050 population, and now all we have are gray rabbits. Okay. Oops. And their tail. And white rabbits. Okay. So again, has evolution occurred here? Okay, in this third generation here. Has evolution taken place? So Brianna says yes, Hasmin says yes. Yes, so the answer is yes. So evolution has again taken place. Okay, so, okay, yes. So Kimberly, so yes, you're on the right track. So natural selection did occur in that the black rabbits did end up dying off. Okay, so black rabbits ended up dying off, and then ultimately that led us to having evolution. Okay, so again, you cannot have evolution without natural selection. Natural selection did occur here, okay, but then we also saw that our population changed by having now just gray rabbits and white rabbits. Okay. So in order to have evolution, you have to have natural selection, but natural selection doesn't immediately lead to evolution, I should say, okay, but it does over a period of time. Okay. So we do see evolution has occurred. Our population has changed from having black, gray, and white rabbits to now just having gray and white rabbits here. Okay. Everyone kind of followed me so far. Is this making sense? Yeah. Okay. Okie dokie. So that's that. So that's good. So Hasmin's question. So basically, it's the Punnett square. Essentially, yes. In this particular example, the Punnett square did take place. We were able to see how kind of genetics kind of played a role here in terms of what offspring are going to end up being produced. Okay. But then we take our Punnett squares to another level when we now consider the environment as a whole and how that's going to impact the survival of those offspring. Yeah. So we're kind of building on everything that we've seen so far. Yeah. Okay. So how do we know that evolution has taken place? How is it that we're able to know that a particular population of individuals, okay, or of a particular species, okay, came from something in the past? Okay. One tool that we can use is fossils. Okay, so fossils are the remains of past species. And so what we can do is we can look at the fossils, okay, and then compare the structure of the organisms in the past to organisms that exist today. Okay, and then if they look kind of similar, and if we can actually see a progression of the structure or the builds of that organism, okay, from one time to the next time, then we are able to indicate that evolution has possibly taken place here. Okay. So if we're able to see a progression of the fossils up until what we see today, okay, a progression of what we saw in the past, and then slowly progressing until we see the structure of a particular species today, okay, then we know evolution has most likely occurred from that initial species in the past. Okay. And so another thing that scientists can use to determine if evolution has occurred is they can use what's called carbon dating of the fossils. And they can basically use this tool to help them identify how long ago those fossils existed, how long ago that particular organism lived, okay, based off of the fossil that someone may have found. And so by using the age of the fossil, they're able to kind of determine how long ago that particular organism lived, and then compare that to the organisms that exist today. Okay. And so you can take all that information and compile that within the fossil record. Okay. So for example, here we've got the progression of a current species of horse. Okay. So here we've got the horse, okay, and so this is what exists today. But if we look in the past, okay, we saw some organisms that looked very similar to the horse. Okay. So if we go back to about 55 to 45 million years ago, we see a particular organism or a particular species of organism called the Eohippus. Okay. That was the initial horse ancestor. Okay. And so one thing that we want to do when we're looking at fossils is we want to look for what's called transition fossils. Okay, transition fossils are fossils that show us an intermediate anatomy between an earlier fossil and either a later fossil or a current living organism. Okay. So the transition fossils, okay, would be showing us that after the Eohippus, we then had the Mesohippus. Okay, and so the Mesohippus Looks a little bit different from the Eohippus. Okay, they're a little bit larger, and they now just start to develop hooves here. Whereas the Eohippus initially was pretty small, it was about the size of a dog, and it had kind of paws, okay, because it lived in an environment that was mostly kind of forest and shrubs. Okay. Once the environment changed to the Mesohip, or to kind of more plains types of environments, they started to develop hooves. They started to get a little bit larger in size. Okay, and then eventually, as the environments changed again, then we start to see the Hipparion. Okay, so the Hipparion, the head started to become a lot larger, started to look more like a horse. The body again starts to enlarge a little bit more. The hooves become more defined, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so these was as they stood around 23 to 2 million years ago. Okay, and then from the Hipparion, we eventually reach the modern day horse. Okay, but again, in order to identify that the modern day horse initially developed from the Eohippus, what we need to find are the fossils of the Eohippus, and then the transition fossils of these species in between the Eohippus and the modern day horse. In this case, that would be the Mesohippus and the Hipparion. Okay, does this make sense? Any questions here? Okay. All right, so those are, so questions. So Kimberly said, have they ever been wrong in identifying species? Yeah, so there's a lot of times that people can be wrong in terms of identifying species. For example, the whale, like the whale, for example, and so when people were first looking at whales, they initially thought that whales were closer related to some species of fish. Okay, but as it turns out, and it's kind of crazy if you think about it, whales are actually more closely related to cows than they are to actual fish. And so what that kind of tells us that they were most likely they most likely came from a common ancestor. And then as they started to evolve and undergo natural selection, some of them ended up going into the sea and then kind of evolved into whales. Other ones stayed on land and then kind of existed as, our modern day cows. Okay, so it's incredible. It's really, really freaking insane to think about. But yeah, that was one example of when people were wrong in terms of knowing where whales came from. Okay. Yeah, so it's pretty crazy. It's a lot of hypothesis work. There's no way to really know for sure, like 100% if something developed from something else. It's just a lot of, you use a lot of different tools, and we'll look at these tools next week in lecture. And you look at the different tools, you look at the different DNA sequences within those particular organisms, and you look to see which ones are more closely related, and then you just kind of come up with a hypothesis. Again, nothing is solidified because you can't really go back in time and determine for sure what happened, but it's a lot of kind of guesswork and a lot of hypothesis work. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, very good question. Any other questions here? All righty, so that's that. Okay, so one of the tools, actually, I'm very glad you kind of brought that up, is there's certain tools that we can use to help us identify whether organisms are related to each other or not. And one of the ways that we can do that is by looking at the anatomy of specific organisms. Okay. So one thing that we're going to be looking at first are homologous structures. Okay. And so homologous structures are structures that have the same basic form, okay, but are used for different functions. Okay. So for example, if we look at the human arm and kind of hand, the dog arm and hand, or I guess its paw, the bird's appendages and the whale's appendages, and we're going to see that those particular structures are going to look very similar. Okay. You're first going to have kind of a humerus bone, which is going to be the upper arm bone. Then you're going to have two bones that are going to be adjacent to each other. You're going to have the wrist and then the phalanges. Okay. So that's what we see in the humans. We have the humerus, the radius, and the ulna, the carpal bones, which make up the wrist, and then the phalanges, which make up the finger. If we look at a dog, we're going to see the kind of same overall structure. It's going to be the kind of upper leg bone, and then the lower leg bone, kind of the wrist, and then leading into the paws here. If we look at a bird, kind of same overall structure, okay, which leads us into the wing. And then for the fins of whales, again, kind of same thing. We're going to see humerus, we're going to see two adjacent bones, the radius and ulna, the wrist, and then the phalanges, which create the fins. Okay, so as we can see, they're built very, very similarly to each other. Okay, and so because they're built very similarly, that tells us that there was likely a common ancestor for all of these organisms. Okay? And so as that common ancestor kind of went on throughout its life and started reproducing, and the offspring started to go to different areas or different environments, those appendages became more useful for doing different functions. Okay? So we initially had a common ancestor with similar appendages, okay? And then over time, those appendages got more specified or more modified for specific functions. Okay. So for example, with the human arm and hand, okay, it's best used for like gripping and moving and things like that. For the dog, the paw is going to be more useful for walking. Okay. For birds, these bones are going to be useful for flying, and then for the whale, these are going to be useful for swimming. Okay. So they got the same overall function, or sorry, the same overall structure, okay, but a different function depending on the environment that it's in. Okay. So those appendages are going to be modified over time to fit their particular environments. Okay. So another example is if we're looking at kind of an ancestor of a particular flying insect. Here we've got a four-winged ancestor, and over time, okay, it might go to specific environments, and as it goes to a different environment, it might evolve into kind of a fly with just two wings, might evolve into a butterfly or a moth with four wings and a certain pattern, or might evolve into a ladybug, okay, with another pattern. Okay. So it's got the same overall structure, okay, same wing type, okay, or structure of the wings, okay, but they're going to be best used for different functions. So those are homologous structures, okay, same basic form, different overall function. Okay. Any questions on homologous structures? Okay. Okay, so now the next type of structure we're going to look at are vestigial traits. Okay. So vestigial traits are traits where you're going to have similar traits in a particular species, okay, but that particular trait is not going to be functional. Okay. So for example, here we've got an ostrich. Okay. An ostrich is a type of bird, right? Birds are going to have wings. Okay. Most birds' wings are going to allow them to be able to fly. However, ostriches will also have feathers and will have wings, but their wings are going to be non-functional. Okay? They're not going to be able to fly using their wings. And so an ostrich's wings would be considered a vestigial trait. Okay? It's a trait that continues to exist over time, even though it does not have any function. Okay? So any wings on flightless birds, those would be considered vestigial traits. Another example would be the pelvic bones in snakes. Okay? So snakes are reptiles. Reptiles are going to have pelvic bones because they have legs. Okay? However, snakes also have pelvic bones, okay, but they do not have any legs. Okay? So the pelvic bone that they have is a result of having a common ancestor, a reptile ancestor who had legs and pelvic bones. Okay? However, snakes lost their legs, but they retained their pelvic bones, but they don't have any function, okay? Because again, they don't have any legs. Okay? And then eyes on any sightless cave animals, especially cave animals in the sea or in the ocean. Okay? And the further down you go, the darker it's going to be. And so those eyes are not going to work, okay? Either because it's either too dark or they just don't function as they should. Okay? But they continue to exist. They continue to have eyes and continue producing offspring with eyes. Okay? So eyes, even though they have no function, continue to exist, and so we consider those a vestigial trait as well. Okay. So vestigial traits that continue to exist despite not having a function. Okay, so those are vestigial traits. And the last one are analogous structures. Okay. So analogous structures are indicative of what's called convergent evolution. Okay. And so convergent evolution tells us that that two different species have developed similar traits, but for the same reason. Okay? Different traits, but for the same reason. Okay? So for example, here we've got an Arctic fox
and then we have a ptarmigan bird. Okay. Both are going to have white coverings. So the fox is going to have white fur. The ptarmigan bird is going to have white feathers. Okay. So it's going to have similar a similar color of the covering. Okay. The function is going to be the same in order to help it kind of blend into the snow. Okay, but structurally they're going to be different. Okay, one's going to be made of fur, the other one's going to be made of feathers. Okay, so structurally they're different. Okay, they're not built the same, but they serve the same purpose. Okay, and so when we look at analogous structures, these are structures that evolved separately. Okay, they did not evolve from a common ancestor, but they evolved because they share a specific environment. Okay, so again, because they both share the snow environment, they're both going to contain white coverings. Okay, one having white fur, the other one having white feathers. Okay, so different structure, but same function. Okay. That's going to be different from homologous structures, which have a similar structure but a different function. Okay, these ones have different structure but the same function. Okay. So those are the coverings. That's an example there. Another example would be kind of the joints and insects versus the joints on vertebrates. Okay. Both insects and vertebrates are going to have joints. Okay. However, they're going to have similar functions in terms of kind of locomotion, but they're going to be built differently. Okay. And so we know that they're not going to be due to common ancestry. Okay. So we know they evolved differently. Cool. All right, and so that is that for today's lab. Any questions on any of these homologous structures, analogous structures, or vestigial traits? Okay, so what I'm gonna do then is I'm gonna show you guys what we're gonna be doing for lab. And so for lab, the first activity we're going to do is we're gonna be looking at the skeletons of 3 different organisms. Okay? So we're gonna have the skeleton of a cat, we're gonna have the skeleton of a bird or a chicken, and then we're going to have the skeleton of a human. Okay? And all of the bones are labeled kind of for your use here. Okay. So after you take a look at the structures and the names of all these different bones and how they're built, okay, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to be looking at the leg bones of the cat, the chicken, and the human. Okay. You're going to look at their differences, okay, and try to identify why their bones might be built the way they are. Okay. So for example, why would the leg bones of a cat be built differently than the leg bones of a chicken, which are built differently than the leg bones of a human? Okay. Why are their leg bones built differently? Why are they built the way they are? Okay. And so as you start to think about that, think about where that organism lives or where the animal lives, how it gets its food, any typical movements it makes, what it has to do on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Be thinking about all those different things and try to figure out why each of these bones might look a little bit different in each of the different species that we're looking at, in the cat, the chicken, and the human. Okay. So you're going to do that for the leg bone, you're going to do that for the pelvic bones, the upper limb bones, and the arm bones. Okay. And again, your goal is to try to figure out why they would be built differently. Okay. So Hasmin, so basically describe the function of each animal for their particular environment. Yes, essentially. Yeah. So you're going to be looking at why its environment allows it to be able to do that, or why it needs its leg bones to be built differently based on the environment that it lives in. Okay. And so Jared's question, so are we to assume that this is in the wild or a domesticated environment? Assume that it's in the wild. Yeah. Assume that these animals are in the wild. Cool. Good questions. Okay, any other questions for this one? Okay. All right, so that's part 1. Okay, part 2 is we're going to be looking at vestigial traits. Okay, so here we've got 2 different structures, because, for example, here we have the human appendix and an other mammal's appendix. And what I want you guys to do is identify whether the underlined word, okay, of this pair is a vestigial structure or not. Okay, determine if it has any use in this particular structure versus the other ones. Okay, so for example, does the human appendix have a function, okay, in humans versus in animals? Do the whale phalanges have a function in whales versus human phalanges. Okay? So determine whether the underlying structure is a vestigial trait or not, okay? And then briefly explain why. Okay, so we're gonna do that for the first three. And for the fourth one, you're gonna come up with an example of two homologous structures, one of which is gonna be vestigial, okay? And then explain why it's vestigial. Okay? So you're gonna basically come up with your own pair for number 4. Okay. That is part 2. Okay. For part 3, we have a picture of a lizard, lizard's arm, a whale's arm, a human, penguin, fish, turtle, and a bird. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to identify a pair of homologous structures, okay. One pair of homologous structures, and then identify one pair of analogous structures. Okay. And then I want you to describe why each pair is either homologous or analogous. Okay. So pick a homologous pair, explain why it's homologous, choose an analogous pair, and then explain why it's analogous. Any questions on part 1 or activity 1 of this lab? Okay. So that is activity 1. The second thing that we're going to do is activity, and so this, yeah, so this is all in your lab manual. This is all in your lab manual. Okay, so that's activity 1. Activity 2 is going to involve watching a video, and then we're going to answer these questions. So we're actually going to do this as a group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this link. I'm going to put it into the chat, and I want you to watch from the beginning up until the 5:42 mark. So take about 6 minutes or so. We're going to watch this video individually. So I'm going to mute my chat. I'll stop sharing this for now. Okay. After the 6-minute mark, just type in the chat that you're finished, or just say done, or say back, or whatever it may be. Okay. Once you're done watching the video, and then we'll go through these questions as a group. Okay. So you're going to watch it on your own, but we're all going to do that right now. Okay. So before we get into that, are there any questions on anything so far? Okay, so there's no questions. Go ahead and, if you're not already muted, go ahead and mute yourself. Watch this video. Okay, again, only up until the 5:42 mark, and then we'll watch the rest of it next week in lab. Okay. Once you're done, come back, just say you're done or back, and then we will answer the questions here together, and that'll be the end of lab. Cool. All right, so go ahead and take some time, go ahead and do this now, and then we'll all come back and discuss it. And I'll go ahead and stop my share here too. Okay, and then go ahead and go for it. Okay, looks like everyone's just about done. All right, so this is a pretty cool video. So this is a video on Peter and Rosemary Grant, who are two of the people, two scientists who have been looking at natural selection and evolution really over the last, several decades. And so they're kind of like the heroes of biology, especially when it comes to natural selection and evolution. So as we saw, they're able to see like how different finches from the Galapagos Islands were able to evolve over a period of time. So let's go ahead and start by taking a look at these questions here. So the first question asks us, okay, what do the different beaks tell us about the ground or the different finches? Okay, so what do we think for this one? Okay, what do the different beaks tell us about the finch species? Anyone have an idea? Right, it tells us exactly. Good job, Rihanna. And yes, you're good. So it tells us what they eat. Okay, so the beaks will give an indication of what that finch species eats. Okay, what its food source is going to be. Okay, so some that have very thick beaks are going to be used for breaking large seeds. Some that have smaller beaks are going to be better able to kind of penetrate into the trees and get off some insects and things like that. Right. So the different beaks will tell you about the food sources for each of the finch species. Good. Next one. So next question says, what are the two hypotheses for how the Galapagos ended with so many species of finches? Okay. So it was one hypothesis. Right, so there was one bird. So one hypothesis was one bird came from the mainland and then diversified into many other species. Okay. Oops. What was the other one? Right, the other one was that you have a bunch of different species that all showed up in different places. Okay. Many different species from different places to that island. All right, so those are the two hypotheses. One hypothesis was that one bird or one species of finch came from the mainland. As it got there, it then started to diversify to other islands, okay? And then all the islands eventually had their own environments, which caused them to all diversify into different species. Okay? The other hypothesis was that you just had multiple different species that all showed up on different islands. Okay? Cool. So that's that. Now, which one of these was the correct hypothesis? Right, the first one. So this one ended up being the correct hypothesis, where we had one bird or one finch coming from the mainland and then diversifying into other species. Okay. So what evidence did they use to rule out the other one? What evidence did they use to rule out the other hypothesis? Anyone remember? So they were all related to one another, but how were they able to determine that they were all related to one another? They used a specific tool. Not necessarily. Yes, Jared got that one exactly right. So DNA analysis. Right. So they used DNA analysis of the finches to show that they were all actually very closely related to one another, and they were actually more closely related than the initial mainland species was. Okay. So they used DNA analysis to rule out this other, the second hypothesis. Perfect. Okay, so that being said, why is the supported hypothesis important for understanding the effects of natural selection on these species. Okay. Anyone have an idea why? Why does this first hypothesis, why is that important for understanding natural selection? Yes, absolutely. So good job, Jared and Asmeet. So all of the different islands had different environments, right? And so if they all had different environments, the individual species that were there needed to have the traits to help them adapt to that environment. Okay? They needed to have the traits that allow them to be able to survive and reproduce in that particular environment. Okay? So that's perfect. So the diversification was due to the environment. So the finches that were able to survive in that particular environment had to have all the traits necessary that allow them to be able to survive and reproduce and be able to produce offspring. Okay? The ones that did not have those particular traits to help them survive ended up dying off. The ones that did have the traits to help them survive ended up, going on throughout their life and producing offspring. Okay? Adaptations for survival ultimately led to natural selection. Okay. So that is that for activity 2. Any questions on this lab or this video that we just watched? It's pretty interesting video, and it'll get more interesting when we look at it in more detail next week. Any questions? Yeah, Christine. Oh, okay. Okay, so if there's no questions, you guys are good to go. Make sure you complete activity 1 since activity 2 is already done. Make sure you write everything in, upload it onto Canvas, and then you are good to go. Okay. And then I will see you guys on Thursday.